Hello and welcome back to my craft room. Well, have I got a story to tell you? Trying to think how long ago it was now, at least a couple of weeks ago, I came on and showed you this amazing box that I'd bought from eBay. It's an ex-shop counter box from the turn of the last century, as far as we can tell. And it is still full of the beautiful silk threads, embroidery threads that belonged to the original owner of this box. Probably not the original owner. I imagine now, from what I've looked up now, it was probably belonged to a shop, and Miss Cheetham, who I now know as Muriel, probably did what I would do and catch the box off the shopkeeper. Oh, that'd be handy to keep my embroidery threads in. Initially I thought maybe she was the shopkeeper, but I realise now there's more to it than that. So you don't need to look at my face. Let's get into the story. I have found out so much, and I have actually made contact with one of Muriel's relatives. I won't say descendants because Muriel didn't have any children herself, but Muriel is in this lady's family tree. Hello, Debbie. I'm not going to say her whole name because to protect her privacy, but it's been lovely to make contact with Debbie, and she and her family enjoyed the story as much as I have, I think. It's amazing what you can do, if you've got an ancestry subscription and you research your family history. It's amazing the contacts you can make. Thank you so much to Debbie and her mum Eleanor and her aunt Gertrude for sharing the story with me, and some wonderful photographs which I'll show you later. I have got a lot to tell you. I've made notes. I have spent hours, very happy hours, trawling through the records on ancestry and the information that Debbie gave me, and going on, doing a bit of Google research and things. Yeah, generally finding out as much as I can. First of all, let me show you some more pictures. I took some better pictures of the contents of the box to show you. I've still got that lovely big bag of threads to sort through, as I'm going to enjoy that. That'll be a nice sort of winter evening job. So in here is the bag of loose tangled threads that ended up in the bottom. I'll show you in a minute. I'll show you the picture. I'll show you the photos first. Okay, here we go. So this was just a picture of the kind of the box standing on its end. So you can see it was Briggs County Crewel Silk, boiling dyes. Briggs was a well-known company. They ended up merging with Coates. They were associated with Anchor, Penelope kits, embroidery kits people might remember. And they go back a long way towards the end of the 19th century. So it's quite interesting finding out about them as well, actually. So this is what, when you open the lid of the box, this is what's inside. All those little tiny samples of silk. They still feel beautiful. The colours are still vibrant. It's just like, just this was amazing to have. And you can see just so beautiful. Look at the colours still. Amazing. Inside the box were 2 trays of threads. So these were the 2 trays of threads. I mean, just look at them, and they feel absolutely beautiful. I will link to my original unboxing of this. I was just made up when I opened it. It's like you buy something on eBay, the photos look all right, but you're not sure what you're going to get. But this exceeded my expectations. Look at the colours. Look how vibrant they still are. I mean, we would pick those colours out now, wouldn't we? And to think this lady who was born in 1885 collected these threads to use for her work. And there we are, a close up of some of them. You can see there's some chenille thread in there. I've never used that before. A couple of viewers have kindly given me some tips on using. I think Martha was one of them. Some tips on, because it can be quite tricky to use apparently. I have been given approval by Debbie and her family to use the threads. They feel it's a good thing to use it. It's showing them respect to give them another life, I think. Some special projects, and then I'll have the box to keep some lovely slow stitch treasures in as well. So there's a picture of the other tray. It's like a box of chocolates. It goes in one tray and then there's another one. So as well as those, there was also the lady that was selling them said there was this tangle of threads in the bottom of the box. So I thought I'd put them in case you can find a use for them. Look. I'll switch quickly to the desk a minute to show you that. If you wish you could be here with me and feel these, they just feel so lovely. And it's amazing that they don't even smell foisty. Foisty is what we call it here in Norfolk, but that will take some sorting out. Where to start? I've just made some notes before I start. Just going back to the desk one more time. Quite important to show you these because this gave me a really good start. Without these, I don't think I'd have... Yeah, no, I definitely wouldn't have found Debbie in the first place. So all I knew was, from here initially, I had these 2 documents. Now these were inside the box, and the lady that was selling them said she left them in there. They were wrapped around some of the threads, and she thought, you know, it would add to the provenance of the box. And it's just, I was so thrilled. Look at my goose pimples going. So this one is dated 1932. And it's addressed to Miss M. Cheetham. I've got an address there. It's from the Spirilla company, and looking at this, what's happened is that there's been a faulty buckle on one of her clients' corsets, the hose supporter buckle, and so she sent it back to them, and they said, yes, that's rubbish, we're not doing them like that anymore, here's a replacement. And you can see that they were based, this is their headquarters at Letchworth. More about that later. So I looked at this and thought, well, I've got Miss M. Cheetham, that's all, and I've got an address. But it's 1932 and censuses haven't been released up to that late yet. One of the things I love about this, before I forget to say, is look at these needles put in. So this was wrapped around a little bundle of threads. These little embroidery needles are stuck into the paper, and these are like some of the thread numbers. Maybe it's how many she needed for a particular project or something, and that's what was wrapped up in the paper. I don't know, I will never know now. And then this one goes even further back. So this is 1896, the vicarage 1896, and it's signed from R. Derbyshire Cheatham, vicar and chairman of the managers. So my first thought was, oh, that must have been her father, she's a vicar's daughter, let's see what else we can find out. So I went on Ancestry and I started hunting, and eventually came across someone's family tree. It was a private family tree, so I messaged the lady who owned the tree, and that was Debbie, and she very kindly got back to me. So Debbie got back to me really quickly, and she said she'd sat and watched the unboxing with her mum and her aunt, which was, or with her parents, yeah, and then her mum had insisted that she phone her aunt as well, to see, you know, just to see what she could remember before getting back to me. So I'll tell you more about that later. They've even sent me some photos. I was just so excited. Calm down, sip of coffee. Hang on. Made myself some notes. I need to get them up on the screen because I knew otherwise I'd get all gabbly and excited. Okay, so this is Miss Cheetham's story as far as I can ascertain it. So she was born Muriel Agnes Cheetham on the 18th of September 1885. So long ago. In Walsall, Staffordshire, in England. She spent pretty much most of her life in Staffordshire. Didn't really move very far from where she was born, actually. And she died on the 15th of September 1972. She was 85, it's a good old age. Her father was the Reverend Robert Derbyshire Cheetham. Looking at this piece of paper, he signs himself R. Derbyshire Cheetham. So clearly Derbyshire was the name he liked to use. And I did wonder later on if there's a bit of a tendency in the family. It seems to, from doing a lot of history, family history research, it seems to run in families where the people just have one name or have 2 or 3 names, and that tendency to use a middle name seems to run in families. And there's also it's quite common to see, especially in older names, to see a surname being used as a middle name. And one of the things I've been told is that it was just to make sure that the people would give their child that surname as a middle name to try and ensure that some, you know, maiden aunt left them their fortune or whatever. So I don't know if that's true. It was a way of showing respect, perhaps, to the other family's surname. Let's put it that way. Going back to my story. I know I'm going to be all over the place here. I know I am. So he was born in Manchester in 1851. Her mother was Amelia Jane Gill, and she was born in Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, in 1858. So Robert, or Derbyshire, and Amelia were married in Cheltenham. So obviously, you know, it's quite traditional to get married in the woman's home town or village. On the 6th of September 1882. Robert, at the time, he was listed as a clerk in holy orders, his father was a merchant. So it's, you know, reasonably well-to-do family. Apparently, Debbie tells me the Cheethams originally did come from a place called Cheatham in Manchester. She was saying it probably was quite nice at that point, but it's a bit run down now, apparently. I haven't looked that up. And I think it's quite a traditional thing for the younger sons in relatively wealthy families to go into the church. So the older son might inherit the family business, the younger son might go into the church, another one will go into the army, you know. So he was obviously the one that went into the church. I'm just, you know, padding out the story, really. I always, what I don't know I make up, you know. I feel funny because I can't see what I hope I'm talking at the camera, right? I found him in 1871 on the census, actually. He was an assistant warehouse man for the Worshipful Company of Parish Clerks. To me, that sounds like maybe he was like an apprentice to become a parish clerk. I don't know. I don't know how that works. I had to stop myself in the end digging into every single rabbit hole because this is really meant to be about Miss Cheetham. I found him in the 1881 census as well. He was a curate. He was a lodger in someone else's house, and he was unmarried at that time. But of course, then in 1882, he gets married. So obviously then he would have had to move into his own home. And as I say, I stopped myself digging any further. So Amelia Jane Gill, or Muriel's mother, she came from a very religious and well-educated family. She was the 7th out of 10 children. I did think it was 7 of 10. There were 7 daughters and 6 of them remained unmarried. So like Debbie said, you know, it seems to be a little bit of a tradition in that family for the women not becoming married. I mean, I thought, you know, it's quite possible that if they could afford to remain unmarried, they would have remained unmarried because they were educated women. They were trained, some of them were trained as teachers, and they enjoyed their profession, and they would have had to give that up when they married. So maybe they chose to remain unmarried. Yeah, interesting. We'll never know. It's all food for thought, though. Anyway, so Amelia had been trained as a teacher. Her father was John Gill, who was a well-respected professor of education and religion at Cheltenham Normal School, and I had to look up what normal school meant. Apparently it's like a teacher training school. And actually I found, okay, so here's a picture I found on one of the forums. This is a link someone had posted showing so this is like an aerial view of Cheltenham Normal School, just out of interest. And here's the street view now. Obviously it wouldn't have looked like this, and you can see some older buildings in the background there. Unfortunately with Google Maps you can't go into, they only go up and down the roads. Yeah, these are all modern buildings quite clearly, but you can see some old-fashioned buildings inside there. Can't get a really good look at them, but yeah. So just out of interest, that doesn't tell you anything hugely relevant about Miss Cheetham, but so yeah, that was Amelia Jane Gill's father. He was a professor at that school, and he wrote several books on the subject. Debbie told me she's actually got a couple of them, and they're a bit boring, but it's nice to have them in it. They're a bit heavy reading. I think I had a quick look. I think I managed to find one on somewhere or other, and saw a quick sort of excerpt of it. I thought, yeah, I wouldn't read an awful lot of that. Need a slurp of coffee now. Robert, or Derbyshire, and Amelia had 2 daughters. I'm going to call him Robert from now on because it's just too confusing. So Robert and Amelia had 2 daughters. There was our Muriel. So she was Muriel Agnes. She was born in 1885, and then her sister Ethel Madeline was born in 1887, both in Walsall. So again, you know, she never moved very far from where she was born, actually. So in 1891, in the census of 1891, I found the family living at 21 Sutton Road in Walsall. So I can show you that if you like. He's got an unusual name. It makes it much easier to search people. Okay, so here is the 1891 England census. Robert D. Cheetham. Chances are it's probably him. Let's have a look, and you can see a quick summary of who else is on there. Whoops, I'm going to click and drag, and I need to scroll on here. So we've got Amelia J. Cheetham, Muriel A. and Ethel M. I think we've got the right family. So if we click on that, we can go in and have a closer look. He's on the bottom of the page, so his wife and daughters will go over onto the next page. So Robert D. Cheetham, 21 Sutton Road, Clerk in Holy Orders. born in Lancashire. And then over the page, there we are. It's Amelia J, Muriel A, and Ethel M. And it's always interesting to see who they live next door to, a buckle manufacturer. And they've got servants next door, but this family haven't got servants. They're not quite so well off yet. The other people up the road seem to have servants, living on their own means. I mean, it's completely possible the census only reflects who was there that day. So even if they were just visiting, they would be recorded here. And if their servants weren't living, if they had they might have had one sort of general maid, which people often did. She might not have been living, or the servants might have had the day off, so they wouldn't have been recorded here. I guess a curate isn't going to be on quite such good money as a buckle manufacturer. So I'm just reading off my notes here, making sure I don't miss anything. So it's just worth it. While we're talking about different family members, another family member I'm going to come back to later was Gertrude. Now I don't know if I'm going to say this right. Greenock Gill, who was born 20th of March 1876, so a bit older than our girls. Born in Cheltenham, a first cousin to Muriel and Ethel. Now she was Debbie's great grandmother, and she emigrated to Canada in 1907, so more about her later. Goose pimples are out again. 1891, we've got the family living at Sutton Road. We could have a look at Sutton Road. It's always, like I say, it's interesting to see to look at the neighbours, to see if they had servants, all those kind of things. I'm trying to imagine, how they were living, the kind of area they were living in. So another thing I quite like to do is to go on Google Maps and look at the actual place, see if it's still there. Sometimes places have been built on or whatever, and they're not. So 21 Sutton Road. I've got to remember to come back and put this on Sutton Road, Walsall. If I do that and then go maps. So that looks like where we want to go. So if I grab the little man, there we go. So this is 21 Sutton Road. So we probably have, oh look, that looks quite nice, doesn't it? So if I walk up here a little bit, 23, 21 must be right here somewhere. Let's have a look. I can't get any nearer. How frustrating. That's saying 15, 19, 21. It must be one of these. Oh look, that says 23, and they're odd numbers on that side. So it's this one. I don't know how to show you. Hopefully you can see my cursor going around there. Now these are looking a little bit. Some of them are looking a little bit run down now. Possibly they're the kind of houses that end up being multiple lets these days. Areas go through cycles, don't they? But at the time when the family were living here, that would have been quite a nice place to live, and there was next door perhaps this bigger house that had the servants, and the buckle manufacturer must have lived here. So Robert Derbyshire Cheatham, the curate, and his wife, who had been a teacher but probably had to stop being a teacher when she married, and their two daughters lived in this house next door to the buckle manufacturer. Oh, I love that. It just brings it to life for me. I just enjoy all that. Okay, I'll be going on for ages. You might not enjoy this at all. You can skip through. You don't have to watch. I'll never know. Slip of coffee. Okay, so moving on to 1896, the next thing I found. So that was the document. Actually, in 1896, 6th of July, is this document, which is addressed to, so that's this one. Hopefully you can see that if I hold it up. I can't see because I'm reading my notes. So yeah, this is addressed to the Northwood, the Friends of the Northwood Church Day and Sunday Schools. So they're obviously at this point based at the Vicarage Northwood. So I'm assuming that means that's where the family now live, because that last census was 1891. This is 1896. They're asking for help with costs of the school. My temptation is to look up all these people as well, but you've got to stop somewhere. So at this point he's vicar and chairman of the managers. And then in 1901 there's another census. I won't bother showing you all of the censuses. No, I'm not going to, because it's just gone far too long. So it's basically another census record. This time the family are living at Northwood Vicarage in Keelings Lane, very much in the same area. 1911, the census changes a bit in 1911 because this was the first time that people were required to actually fill it in themselves. Before that, an enumerator went round and called house to house and filled it in for you. I love it when you get the 1911 census because it's written in someone's own handwriting. They've signed it themselves, and there were extra bits of information like how many children had there been in the, how long had the marriage been, how many children had there been in the marriage, how many were living, how many were dead. Because sometimes, there's a lot of confusion. It can cause a lot of confusion when you're filling in your tree. In this case, they hadn't lost any children, fortunately, and they just had the 2 girls. It also tells you how many rooms. So I do want to look. I'm going to show you this one because, and then I want the 1911 census. Again, I think I could be fairly sure. Robert Derbyshire Cheatham, Clerk in Holy Orders, Amelia Muriel and Ethel. I think we got the right family. So yeah, as I say, I love this because it just feels more personal because they filled it in. 1 Victoria Street, Hanley. Hanley is another one of the. I'll come to that a little bit later. But basically, Stoke-on-Trent is made up of several what were smaller towns that are known as the Potteries, and Hanley is one of those. So this is 1 Victoria Street, and here he is. So that's his own writing. He will have filled that in. Well, possibly Amelia Jane will have filled it in. Normally it tends to be the man, and you can see he's signed it there, and that looks like the same writing to me. There's no profession given for Amelia Jane, so although she was trained as a teacher, she was married, and I think there was an obligation to, once you married, you had to give up your occupation, and that carried on well into the 20th century, didn't it? So you practically can see why her 6 sisters chose not to marry, if they loved their work or their freedom, their independence. I don't know. Yeah, lot to unpack there, really. And you can see Muriel, Agnes, and Ethel Madeleine. So Muriel's listed as a technical teacher in dressmaking and millinery for the Education Committee. There's no profession given there for Ethel. So one of the things it does in this, so you can see if you look here, completed years the present marriage has lasted. So they've been married for 28 years. Children born alive, children still living, children who have died. And that can be really useful for working out puzzles in your family tree. And then this is the bit I quite enjoy. Right below, the number of rooms in this dwelling, house, tenement or apartment. Count the kitchen as a room, but do not count scullery, landing, lobby, closet, bathroom, nor warehouse, office or shop. Considering you're not counting any of those things, they've got 10 rooms, so that would have been a fair-sized house they were living in. So they were, they were reasonably well off. I haven't shown you the pictures yet either. I've just got so much to show you. I'm going to make myself stick to the plan here. Avoid the temptation to go, oh, let me show you this. Oh yes, and the other thing I didn't actually point out in that census was that he was listed as a C of E vicar now. So next date I've got is 1922, and that's when sadly Robert died. He was 71. I suppose it wasn't a bad age for those days, but to me 71 seems really young now. He died on the 6th of January 1922, and he left effects of, or his estate was valued at £2,013 7 shillings and 6pence. And Muriel, his daughter, was listed as administrator of the will. Let's find out how much that would have been worth. I'll just find out how much £2,000 would have been worth in 1922. Value of 1922 British pounds today. So he left, the equivalent of what he left in 1922 would be worth around £37,000 today. Not an awful lot, really, is it? It's not enough, it wouldn't be enough to buy a house with, for sure. So, he would have left them needing to fend for themselves. So that's interesting. Yeah, they'd have had to find a way to look after their mum, and maybe family would help them a bit. I mean, that's a nice little nest egg, but they certainly would have had to be. I'm assuming that amount would have included whatever any house was worth. Possibly if they'd been living in a vicarage, it was attached to his job, and they would have lost that. when he passed away. So I don't know how that would have worked, but yeah, they'd have, I can see what, the girls would have ended up having to work for their living. So the next date I've got is 1928, and that's when Amelia, their mum, died. And then in 1932 we've got the typed letter from Spirilla to Miss Cheetham. So they say Miss M. Cheetham, and I have assumed all along that's Miss Muriel Cheetham. But later on there is a Madge Cheetham, and this gets a little bit confusing. So I'm now wondering, Spirilla, if you haven't heard of them, that was a fascinating rabbit hole. So let me show you this. So here's the Wikipedia page about Spirilla. It's called that because of kind of spiraled coils of wire that were flattened out and used as the kind of structuring for, as the kind of like the boning for these corsets. That's why it was called Spirilla. And they was started in 1904, and the different thing about them is that they had these, they called them corsetiers, and that's what our girls were. Corsetiers who went to people's personal homes to fit them for corsets, and then they would measure them up for their corsets. They would get them made, custom made for them, and then their corsetier, their personal corsetier, would go back to their home and fit it for them. And also service them for them, get them mended and things like that. It's absolutely fascinating. There's this, here is the Spirilla building. This letter that we've got was addressed from the Spirilla building in Letchworth. So here is the Spirilla building in Letchworth, still in existence. And I've got an even better photo to show you in a minute. Hang fire. And then they also had, what did they call it? Their parlour. They called them parlours, corset parlours. So their London office and parlours were here in Oxford Circus. It's the second building from the left fronting onto the circus. So it's this big one here was the Spirilla building. It's pretty impressive, isn't it? And this one. Now, let me show you. Before I say any more about Spirilla, let me just show you while we're looking at this beautiful building. Can you see the top of that building has got that arched window? The building is still a very beautiful building, and apparently most of it is now offices and things, but the upper floor with the arched window there can still be hired out as a beautiful venue. And guess what? Our Zoe Hartist, who you might know here on YouTube and in our Discord community, she got married there, and she has very kindly shared some photos with me and has allowed me to share them with you so you get a better look at what this amazing building looks like now. So there's so much in this story, isn't there? Right, so I've just got to find that now. I'm going to go into Discord. Look at that! So you can see that's the same building, and there's our beautiful Zoe. Look at that picture. I love how she's got these amazing red shoes on and he's got red shoes as well. I love that. There's another picture showing a different part of the building. Isn't it gorgeous? Gosh, it looks amazing. What a beautiful building. Look at that. Look at that car. Oh, absolutely fabulous. And this is from the inside of the building. So that's that amazing arched window that you can see from the outside. What a wonderful venue. And she said it cost less than you would have thought it would as well. Fabulous, absolutely fabulous. I wonder what she did with her wedding dress. Have you still got it, Zoe? So yeah, I thought you'd like to see that. If you're interested in all, because it's fascinating, the history about these Spirilla corsetiers went on from like turn of the century right through to I think as late as the 80s, and they were still then looking after clients who went back as far as Muriel Cheetham did, and were still using their corsets, still swore by them. And lots of famous people, like Marilyn Monroe is one that comes to mind, used these corsets. Yes, mate, there's a whole kind of culture around it, and I'd never heard of it at all before. It's absolutely fascinating. So if you have a look at, here we go. I'll put links to these things in the description box. Corsetier.net. Ivy Leaf's tribute to the corsetier. Oh, wow. This is fascinating. What a rabbit hole this is. So if I just go in here. There's a Spirilla magazine, 1965. This is November 2011 reenacted. There's just masses and masses of fascinating photos and history in here. You talk about rabbit hole. It's many rabbit holes all networked together. So I would definitely recommend that. I'll put a link to that in the description box. And apparently it's quite common for corsetiers would normally be married ladies. They would usually call them Mrs. So-and-so or Madam So-and-so. Or quite often it was unmarried sisters. So it may be that both sisters were Spirilla corsetiers. There's a little bit of confusion. Let me explain my confusion here. So in 1932, we've got this typed letter from Spirilla to Miss M. Cheetham, clearly one of their corsetiers. And it's addressed from their Letchworth headquarters, we've just been looking at, to, I was assuming, Muriel at Fernley, 120 Park Road, Burslem, Stoke-on-Trent. So Burslem is another one of these towns that makes up the city of Stoke-on-Trent. Let me show you that first and I'll come back. So we're at 108 Park Road. Now this now gives it as Tunstall, not Burslem, but Tunstall, not Burslem. Tunstall is another one of the small towns that made up the city of Stoke-on-Trent. But there's a reason why I know I've got the right one. If I can just get to 120, try to get myself parked right. Oop, no. It's that one. I know where I want to go. Just trying to get near enough. So here we go. Now this is 120 Park Road. There's a reason why I know it's the right one, because look, if you can see how much I can, there we go. Can you see here engraved into that gatepost, Fernley? So I know I've got the right one. I was so excited when I found that. So that is where Muriel Cheetham and or her sister were living in 1932. And it probably won't have changed an awful lot. It looks like they've had new windows, but other than that it would look pretty much the same. We can have a little look up and down the road. It's called Park Road. There's a park opposite. Beautiful, lovely old house there. Of course there would have been all these cars, but pretty much this is the view they would have seen. Quite nice. So that's that. Let's go back to explaining my confusion. So that letter is dated 1932. Kelly's Directory in 1932 lists a Madge Cheetham, also at 120 Park Road. Is it possible that Ethel Madeline, were they in the habit of using middle names like Robert Derbyshire Cheetham? Was Muriel known as Muriel Agnes? Who knows? It seems unlikely that Muriel would be shortened to Madge. It seems more likely short for Madeline, doesn't it? And there's more about that in a minute. That more to add to that confusion in a minute. The next date I could find anything was 1939. So in 1939, at the beginning of World War II, they did kind of a big register of all of the adults in the country, where they lived and what their occupations were. It's just kind of a resource gathering exercise, I think, as much as anything. So Muriel and her younger sister are listed as living at 24 High Lane, Burslem. Again, Burslem, Stoke-on-Trent is another one of these little towns that makes up Stoke-on-Trent. I'm going to take myself off on another tangent here just to show you this. So if you're interested in the pottery towns, okay, so I've just had to come back now because I've just recorded all this with the camera looking at my face and I didn't realise. So this is a brilliant site called thepotteries.org. There's loads and loads of history about the old the 6 pottery towns that made up Stoke-on-Trent. Lots and lots of interesting stuff here. Here are the towns, Tunstall, Burslem. Those are the two that kind of seem to have got, the edges are blurred a bit because Muriel's address here is given as Burslem, but it was Tunstall on today's Google Maps, so borders tend to blur, don't they? So we've got Tunstall, Burslem, Hanley, Stoke, Fenton and Longton, and those pottery towns make up today's Stoke-on-Trent. Really fascinating site this, lots to look at. I will link to it below. This is another one, theredheadstokey.co.uk. Really loads of interesting stuff, beautifully presented, some modern current news and things, as well as, oh, look at that, someone's put Joke-on-Trent, I think. Joke-on-Trent. Someone put Joke-on-Trent. having to go about the state of the roads. But these, I love this kind of thing. So Burslem then and now. So Burslem is where our Muriel and Ethel lived. And I love when you get these photos where they've put the two, you've got old and new juxtaposed like that. So you can look at a picture from exactly the same viewpoint like this and see how it looks today. Just love that. I find it absolutely fascinating. There's a railway station there that's almost completely gone. There's hardly any sign of it at all left there. It's all just part of a walk now, look. I mean, chances are Muriel might have gone to this monumental masons to sort out her parents' gravestones. You know, here's a picture of the high site as they would have known it. Freeman Hardy Willis there. Chances are somewhere in this scene is the haberdashers that our thread box originally came from. Who knows? I really wish I did that. I really wish I knew. Absolutely fascinating. I'm going to leave links to all these things in case you're as interested in it as I am. Going back to that start of the First World War register, that 1939 register. I think they called it a register. So Muriel and her younger sister Ethel are living at 244 High Lane, Burslem. I might look that up in a minute. So again, that's one of our towns we've just been talking about. Muriel's listed as a civil servant for the Ministry of Labour. So she would have been one of the people that was kind of organising resources. I think one of my own ancestors was in a very similar role at that time. Ethel, her younger sister, is listed as a Spirilla corsetiere, and they're both unmarried. Also living with them, or possibly they're living with her, it's hard to tell, because you haven't got a kind of head of household listed in that register, is Eliza Gill. Recognise the name Gill? Eliza Gill, an unmarried, retired schoolmistress. So again, the schoolmistress. Now, is she a maiden aunt? I know, going back, this is a little discussion I had with Debbie. I think, it used to be a thing. I know my parents' generation talk about maiden aunts. They were always maiden aunts, and it's partly because sadly a lot of the young men they would have married got killed in the two great wars. There was this thing of, I think some women did choose to remain unmarried if they could manage to do it. And so they ended up these maiden aunts that people had to go and visit and kiss even when they had hairy chins. That's the kind of story my mum used to tell, and my father. So Eliza Gill, I'm assuming, I had to stop myself going any further, because there seems to have been a tradition in the Gill family to be trained as teachers and for the women to remain unmarried. I'm assuming this was one of Amelia Jane's unmarried sisters who'd also trained as a teacher. So that's at 244 High Lane, Burslem. Okay, remember that. Next date I've got, sadly, is in 1962. Ethel, Muriel's younger sister, died. She's only 75. She died on the 31st of March 1962, still as a spinster. She left £2,715, 9 shillings and 5 pence to Muriel, who was also listed as a spinster. Should we look up what that was worth in 1962? Not as much as it was worth in 1920 whatever. £27,329.99. Not bad. Not bad. Nice little nest egg for her sister. And I think maybe that was partly how she managed to afford to go and visit family in Canada. But more about that in a second. So just to carry on explaining this confusion about who was who and where they lived, bearing in mind that Ethel has died in 1962, they're both listed at 244 High Lane, Burslem in 1939. And in 1963, there's a phone directory that shows Muriel Cheetham, it just says Muriel Cheetham, at Slade Vicarage, 156 High Lane, Burslem, and Madge Cheetham, who's listed as a Spirilla corsetiere, at 244 High Lane, Burslem. And then in 1968 phone directory, So it's another couple of years later. So this is now 6 years after Ethel has died, who might be called Madge. We've got a Miss M.A. Cheetham living at 156 High Lane, and a Muriel, spelt differently, spelt with an A, Cheetham, at number 244. It's really, I'm confused. I mean, it could be that Madge was Madeline. She lived at a different address up the same road. She was the one who was a Spirilla corsetier, and it's just that she was still listed in the phone directory because no one had let BT know to take her off, and perhaps because the maybe Muriel still owned. I don't know. We'll never know that. Well, I could maybe do some more digging, but I had to stop. When Muriel died in 1972, her will recorded her as still living at 244 High Lane. She left £749, by the way. She had no one left to leave it to, did she, really? So, yeah, it's confusing. I feel like Muriel had lived at 244 High Lane for all of those years, since at least just before the war. I'm just confused about... I can't really be sure for certain, because I've got Miss M. Cheetham here, that it wasn't Madge who was the Spirilla corsetier. Possibly Muriel did the teaching all the way through and then worked as a civil servant. I can't be certain. I might do more digging. I might not be able to resist. But anyway, you don't need to know all that. So I'm going back and forth a little bit now, because in 1964, so a couple of years after her sister had died, Muriel decided to visit her family in Canada. Clearly at one point there was a close connection, because from what Debbie tells me, we'll come back to Debbie's side of the story now. From what Debbie tells me, they were close at one point. They were really close. So when her great-grandmother, so that was Gertrude Greenalch, it's Green, A-L-C-H, Greenalch Gill. When they were all young, she was first cousins with Muriel and her sister Ethel. And she actually named her firstborn child after their two second names. So she named her first child Agnes Madeline. So I mean, that, you know, that I would say means that she was fond of them. So I'm going to start showing you some of the pictures now. We're going to go now into the stuff that Debbie told me. This is where it really all started to come to life for me. I just thought this was amazing, and I'm huge gratitude to Debbie and her mum and her aunt for allowing me to share this with everybody. And they're beautiful pictures. I'm just so chuffed, and I'm so glad that they've given me permission on Muriel's behalf to actually use the threads and feel okay about it. So we're going to start this part of the story now with Debbie's great-grandmother, who was Gertrude Greenalch Gill. I'm going to show you a picture of her. Here we go. So here's a picture of Gertrude. Isn't she beautiful? What a beautiful lady. So well turned out. Beautiful tailored jacket. Now, you know, they would have done an awful lot of their own stitching. They probably... Muriel was listed as a teacher of dressmaking and millinery, wasn't she? So, you know, perhaps they did a lot of their own as well. I'm not going to jump onto the other photos just yet. Gertrude was born 20th of March 1876 in Cheltenham, in Gloucestershire in England. She emigrated to Canada, and she was very close with her cousins, Muriel and Ethel. She emigrated to Canada in 1907. Her fiancé had already gone over there a year before, and they got married the day she arrived. How romantic. And it's very sweet that Gertrude named their first daughter, so this is Debbie's grandmother, Agnes Madeline. So she was Agnes Madeline Alden. So she named them after her cousins Muriel and Ethel. And Debbie says she's fairly sure they communicated via letter, but she hasn't got any of them, and she can't really prove that, but they probably did. I mean, these days we'd be on the internet, wouldn't we? We'd be on Skype and things, but they only really had letters then. And their second daughter was called Gertrude. Now, she says that all three of Gertrude's daughters could sew beautifully, but she didn't inherit that gene. But they could all sew beautifully. And actually, Debbie's wedding dress was made by her great aunt Gertrude, so that was the second daughter of Gertrude who emigrated to Canada. So let me show you some more pictures now. This is so exciting. letters. But so these are Gertrude, who emigrated. These are her daughters, two of her daughters. This is Emma on the left. This is Tom Brown, who is the husband of Agnes Madeline Brown. So this is Agnes Madeline, who was named for our Muriel and Ethel. So she got their middle names. So that's her on the right there in that lovely yellow dress. So going from the right here, we've got Gertrude. So she was the second daughter of Gertrude, who emigrated. And she's the great aunt who made Debbie's wedding dress for her. We haven't got a picture of Debbie's wedding dress. That would have been nice. I think I'm asking for too much. And then the next one is Agnes Madeline, is it? Yeah, the next one is Agnes Madeline with her son, Gerald. And then the next one is Emma. So that's the three sisters, the three daughters of Gertrude who emigrated. And then sitting there with the lovely print frock and the hat on, that's Gertrude herself. So that's you've got the young Gertrude there. There she is with her three grown-up daughters and a grandson there. We don't know who the couple on the end is. And finally, while I'm in here, I may as well show you this, so you can have a look at you can bear this picture in mind when I tell you the rest of this next bit of the story, which I think is hilarious. So here is Gertrude. It looks like a warm sunny day, but she's got a suit and a twin set on by the look of it. She is smiling. It looks like she's wearing spectacles. I don't know where this was taken, whether it was a picture that was sent to them that was taken in this country, or whether it's a picture that they took during her visit when she visited them. I don't know. I don't think Debbie mentioned. But you can kind of see there, and I think you can see a family resemblance with like the shape of the nose and the cheekbones. I think you can see a family resemblance there for sure. If that photo, that one photo that we've got of Muriel, if that wasn't taken during the visit to Canada, she must have been around that age, because it was in 1964 that she visited Canada. It was Vancouver in Canada. And I'm just going to read you this little bit from Debbie's email, I think. So it's very sweet that apparently Debbie and her mum and her aunt toyed with the idea of telling me a lovely romantic story and sending me a beautiful picture of a younger woman that they happen to have who's a friend of their granny's or something. And giving me a lovely romantic story to share with you all, to go with the beautiful threads. But they decided to tell me the truth, and I'm so glad they did. This is what Debbie says. Muriel, she says quite a lot, but I'm just going to read you this little bit. Muriel visited Vancouver in about 1964. I've asked my parents and my aunt about the visit, and the story they tell is quite funny. Apparently, she said she was on a world tour, and she came to stay with her parents for a few days. So, I mean, she might have been, she had that bit of money to spend. Her sister, she knew she had no one left to leave it to. Maybe she just thought, I've always wanted to see the world, let's do it. And maybe she just wanted to connect with family because she didn't have many left. I don't know. It must be difficult when you get left on your own without children at that age. And, like Debbie said, well, I'll come back to that in a minute. Anyway, of course, they had never met her. And by this time, great-grandmother Gertrude had been dead for almost 20 years. So no one really knew this cousin Muriel. And she says, my mother tells me she was quite imperious, directing my mother to pour my tea at breakfast and waiting to be served at other meals. I'm told she was very exacting. I was a curious and chatty 2-year-old and was probably unaware that this lady wasn't accustomed to children. I was certain that I was the centre of everyone's world, right? Like you are when you're 2. My mother tells me that Muriel went to use the bathroom and didn't close the door all the way. Of course, I followed her and walked right in. Muriel proceeded to call me a very naughty child, probably terrifying the hell out of me. I think it's funny, but my protective mother and aunt still don't. And to this day, when they refer to cousin Muriel, they do so with a certain look. It tells me they were not impressed. My mother says she thought she was the Queen. It sounds like she was a very old-fashioned English lady. And when you think that she was born in 1885, she'd seen 2 world wars and a lot of changes. And I guess the way, the background that her mum, when you think about, that's why I went on about the background so much really and wanted to find out about it, because it kind of explains how she was the way she was, the background they came from. They were well educated. They might not have had buckets of money, but they had a certain kind of expectation, I guess, a certain lifestyle they were used to. And of course, all of that changed, didn't it? And I think a lot of it going back all those years was about keeping up appearances. And even if you didn't have servants, you perhaps learn to behave as if you did. Oh, so yeah, they had this big debate about whether or not to tell me the truth, and I'm so glad they did. Debbie says, and I think I feel the same way, parents and her aunt think that she probably wasn't that nice of a person. She was a bit mean and she's a bit of a snob. But Debbie says, I think she's probably lonely. Her sister had died in 1962. I mean, they'd obviously either lived together or been very closely involved and relying upon each other all those years. She was alone and part of an old and disappearing way of life. She was trying to make a connection with family she didn't know and who were busy with the young family themselves. Debbie now works with frail and elderly seniors. I've worked, that's what I used to do. So I'm going to say I think I could have won her over if I met her now and not in the bathroom in 1964. We're almost exactly the same age, Debbie, as well. Yeah, and I used to like the challenge of getting on with the old dears that no one else could tolerate, and trying to, or the ones who weren't very keen on getting along. I always used to enjoy trying to find a way to connect with them, and it's nice to think you perhaps could have found a way. For me, we'd have been talking about stitching. So yeah, she was. Who knows? I'd love to have met her. I bet she was quite a character to have gone through everything she went through and seen everything that she saw and come out the other end of it. She was probably living alone when she died. We don't know how she died. I could look into it. I could find out a lot more. I might still, but I think I've probably done enough for now. There's still a little bit more of the story to show you. Debbie knows that Gertrude, her great-grandmother Gertrude, did go back to England after she emigrated a couple of times, and she knows that she visited family both times. That's the thing with it, when you emigrated in those days, you couldn't whiz back and forth. There weren't any cheap flights or anything, and it would have taken a long time to get there. It would have been a really expensive thing. When you emigrated, chances are you said goodbye and that was it. You weren't going to see each other again. It must have been so hard. But then, having said that, you were going to a new and optimistic new life, I suppose. So, yeah. But anyway, so she knows that she returned to England in 1911 and 1928. So I looked into that as well. I couldn't find her on the way over here in 1911, but I found her return to Canada on a ship called the Tunisian, with Charles Richard Alden, who I'm assuming was her husband, and her daughter. And then, funny enough, she happened to be here during the time of the 1911 census. So I found her, and I was so made up to find her. So she is recorded as a visitor at Bashall Eves Schoolhouse in Clitheroe, along with her 2-year-old daughter Agnes Madeline. Now her husband must have been off visiting someone. She must have just visited them that night. Maybe her husband was staying with other friends or family. So they were visiting someone called Walter Ireland, who was a grazing farmer and an employer, so kind of a well-to-do farmer, and Mary Alice Ireland. More about her in a minute, who was recorded as a head teacher at an elementary school. They'd actually, if you remember, the 1911 census was the one that people had to fill out themselves, so quite often they made mistakes. So they'd put church school and then crossed that out and amended it to county council elementary school teacher. So I looked up Bashall Eves School just to see it might be Basil. Don't know how you say it. Bashall. And I found Mary Alice there. So let me show you this document in a sec. So in 1882, a Mary Alice Eastham is recorded as the new headmistress at Bashall Eves School. And it's really interesting because there are lots of Irelands about who are a farming family, and the young Irelands were noted in the school records as being absent from school due to carrying out farm work. And let me show you quickly this document that I found. Have I still got it? Yes, here it is. So this is chippinghistory.co.uk. I'll link them as well because they got some interesting photos and things. And this is all about the early years of that school. Talking about discipline and stuff, different holidays and things. You can see Ireland's cropping up in here quite a bit. Other reasons for non-attendance: sheep washing in June, beating for the gentlemen at local shoots. That's where they kind of beat the undergrowth to make the birds fly so they can shoot them. John and Richard Marsden were both punished with the rod for insulting an old man in the road. Kept scholars till 5 o'clock for talking and whispering during school hours. Oh. Read a notice received from the Education Department and cautioned the scholars not to throw stones or anything else at the telegraph wires. So it's probably a novelty at the time, as they say. Punished Mary Ann Marsland for rudeness and Gertrude for stubbornness. I think that was a coincidental Gertrude. Oh, 3 scholars haven't attended school since Thursday because I insisted on having clogs cleaned and being obeyed in this matter. So it was traditional to wear clogs. I think that was more the poorer people that wore clogs. Yeah, so they just didn't turn up for school. Henry Ireland, Sarah Ireland and Ellen Ireland kept at home to make hay. That was the important thing, more important than school. Okay, so on August the 15th, 1882, a new headmistress, Mary Alice Eastham. Later, Ireland, after her marriage, commenced duties. She stayed at the school for 34 years. By 1890, there were 50 children on the register. The school curriculum had widened and Miss Eastham was still coping single-handed. That would have been a lot. How relieved she must have been to be able to record on the 9th of April that year that Miss Middlefell commenced work as an assistant teacher for 3 months. No entry as to when she finally retired, but on the 1st of September 1916, so that's 5 years after that visit, when Gertrude visited, there's an entry that Dorothy C. Ireland is appointed by the managers as permanent headmistress. And they've put here, was she Mary's daughter? Well, clearly they've not got an ancestry subscription because, yes, she was. I found her. I think that's all the things up here I'm going to show. I'm going to link to all of these things in the description box in case you want to check any of them out. So in 1928, I did find Gertrude on the incoming passenger list on the Mont Royal, arriving in July to stay with her father in Grimsby. And in 1928, October the 26th, 1928, she returned to Canada on the Duchess of Bedford. Gave her occupation as bookkeeper. I think that's all I've got to share with you. Isn't that amazing? Have I showed all the pictures I was going to show? I think I have. I'm going to link to everything that all the sources that I've used. I'm going off nearly an hour and a half now. I'm going to have to edit this right down or do it in 2 parts. But my goodness me, what an interesting rabbit hole that was. I love social history. I love how these beautiful threads have so much history in them, and I've now got a personal story behind them. I think I'm going to make something really special using these threads. I even thought I might do a imaginary swap with Miss Cheetham. I'll make a swap square. If I was sending a swap square to Miss Cheetham for the stitchery swap, or if she was sending one to me, I might do something like that. But yeah, I'm going to make some lovely fabric journals or something, and I'm going to use the box itself as somewhere to keep some of my beautiful fabric treasures, some of the lovely things that people have sent me and things like that, really special things. And yeah, it's just lovely to have. Well, I hope you enjoyed that long rambly thing such as I did. Hopefully if you actually clicked on this to watch it, you're interested in this kind of thing and you will have enjoyed that. If anybody else has got any interesting bits of history relating to anything I've talked about, please do share it in the comments. I find it absolutely fascinating, all this kind of thing. I really do. And if you've got, what would you do? What would you do with Miss Cheetham's threads? What would you do? What do you think she'd want me to do? I hope at least some of you might have enjoyed that. Thanks again for joining me, and I will see you again really soon. Bye. A sore throat from talking too much now.